Before I begin this chat, I want to acknowledge the primacy of acting, not talking, acting, in urgent aid of Palestinians, 1.4 million of whom are trapped in RAFAH, the southernmost point of Gaza, and now in danger of the IDF, who are beginning an attack on them that could only become an unprecedented bloodbath if it's allowed to carry out without any intervention. But I also want to acknowledge that for me, for many of my comrades and friends, Palestinian or otherwise, there is a crippling and sometimes paralysing sense of devastation and despair that can come when you're on your own looking at this kind of thing. It can render you paralytic with hopelessness and despair. Currently, what I'm trying to do, maybe this is of some help for you, is avoid the things that I know to render me inert. For example, there's a lot of people online who make very understandable expressions of despair, and maybe they benefit from the consolation that comes in their comments. But for me, it renders me inert, and I'm trying to avoid the social media platforms where I read those things. I watch Yasin Bey videos, formerly Most Def, the rapper. He gives me a sense of hope. He repeats the mantra,
"We are not a caravan of despair."
I might be in despair on my own when I stare at the reality of what's happening to Palestinians after all the effort we've tried to put in our own separate ways. There's a sense of helplessness that can come about when I'm on my own, but collectively, ours is not a caravan of despair. We are a hopeful movement. Together, I try to find things that remind me of that and avoid the things that make me forget that. I try to remember the things that have changed here. Oh God, Israel never lost an information war like this. I know it hasn't stopped them doing what they're doing, but holy shit, an international court never treated Israel like this. It does all count for something. We must keep fighting because there are 1.4 million people trapped and they are at the behest of genocidal maniacs, and oh my God, that is so depressing. But ours is not a caravan of despair, so please just keep going and then see what direct action you can take part in, not just rallies. Don't lie down now. In late January, around about a month ago now, a WhatsApp chat was leaked, a private chat, ostensibly private, albeit one that did have around 600 people in it, so very likely to leak like a sieve. This chat was called Jewish Australian Creatives and Academics, and it was set up sometime after October the 7th. A lot of it, a fair bit of the chat, particularly among the most prolific on there, seems to have been dedicated to conspiring to limit or affect the careers of people they didn't like in the group, people with pro-Palestinian points of view. Most egregiously, and the first item of information to be publicly released from it, was this. There appeared to be a coordinated effort within this group to get Antoinette Lattouf fired, which of course we know did actually end up happening. So this chat log, in tandem with the leaked chat log of another chat called Lawyers for Israel, which came out just a little earlier than this Creatives and Academics one, evidenced a great degree of scheming by some sort of mid-level and some quite prominent names to conspire to limit or affect the careers and the reputations of other people with pro-Palestinian viewpoints. It was fantastic that it was leaked. It was justice for anyone whose career had been affected for having pro-Palestinian viewpoints. It allowed people to go through the chat log, provide evidence, make commentary and analysis on what people, some of whom were quite prominent in the arts and academia, were up to when it came to scheming and conspiring. And on the whole, despite the relative lack of mainstream media interest in the issue, most of them appeared interested in pretending it didn't even happen, it did cause a lot of these people to scatter, and it was great. It was a real win. But it didn't end there, because on around February the 8th, someone compiled and released the entire chat log with all of the phone numbers redacted from the log. But in a drop, they also released a spreadsheet containing catalogued names of all 600 people said to be in that chat. There was further information there for some of the more prominent people within the chat, such as social media contact details, and professions. There was another attachment which also showed photos of several members of the group, and in some of those photos they were pictured with their family. The story did a sharp 180 at this point, and suddenly it became an item of international news significance. Within 4 days, it had become something that lobbyists had managed to release countless articles from through their collaborative news sources, quote unquote, and they had also managed to reach the Prime Minister himself, who brought forward a discussion on adding anti-doxing laws to upcoming privacy legislation that they were considering tabling anyway, specifically to address these concerns over this story that had initially been about leaked chat logs and now suddenly was about doxing. Articles like this have begun, and they're probably never going to end. You could probably go through up to and including 600 whole people to talk to them about how upset they are by their doxing. Let's have a look at some of the articles and the coverage that I thought was interesting and thoughtful. This one on The Conversation attempts to get into the definition and the guts of what defines doxing and the ethics surrounding it, which is, tricky territory and one that requires a bit of experience, I think. The article attempts to define doxing as the public release, usually onto the internet, of identifiable information about a person that is usually done without the person's consent and aims to expose or punish them in some way. It then goes on to reference a statement which was made after the tide of doxing related media coverage culminating in the PM's statement. The people behind the release asserted no links had been made to members' addresses, phone numbers or emails, all of which were deliberately redacted. You remember I said before that the mobiles were redacted from the chat log. And yeah, it is important in that it references a popularly held view of some people's definition behind doxing, that it has to have been previously publicly unavailable information or information that might directly lead to your location or something of that order. In 2019, Osman Faruqi released this ABC background briefing article on the ongoing abuse that he had received as a result of his phone number being shared publicly by Avi Yemeni. And when he shared that, he included a definition of doxing that, as you'll see, is slightly different. His definition was that it involves releasing personal information like your phone number, address, or social media profiles to a hostile digital audience. Now, a notable thing is that Avi Yemeni actually responded to him at the time, and this is slightly disingenuous, but he said, it was all publicly available info. He had gotten Osman's number from a publicly available source. That was his defence, and he wasn't lying, that is actually true. But nor does that shield him from the culpability of having released details that led to abuse and harassment of him to his hostile digital audience. Perhaps the argument that Avi Yemeni made was essentially the same as the argument being made here behind the people that decided to release the spreadsheet listing 600 Jewish people. However, it's almost immaterial. The bottom line is there's a shifting sands definition aspect to doxing here, clearly. This crikey article quite fairly points out that there are already laws that govern doxing. Using a carriage service to menace, harass or cause offence online, it already is used to prosecute online stalking and the like. That's far from being the only possible foreseeable problem of Albanese responding to a moral panic by hastily introducing the idea of these laws. Rich people who already abuse defamation law who would begin to abuse this kind of thing too, to prevent stories being published about them and including sensitive info of theirs. Bernard Keane, writing excellently for Crikey on the nauseating hypocrisy from mainstream media and government on the matter of this doxing and the group that it was in response to, wrote about how since the publishing of this list, the record has been so changed about the doxing that now 9 journalists are saying things like, the individuals had joined a WhatsApp group that was not heavily political and sought to provide support to each other because of the rise of anti-Semitism. If the fact that this didn't end up in the PM's hands within 4 days doesn't give you a sense of how out of hand this whole thing has gotten, have a look at this shit in the pages of The Australian. First of all, This person, Talia M. Salem, ain't no ordinary blogger and podcast host. She actually works for the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, who, it should be noted, are the font of much of the anti-Palestinian rhetoric and lobbying that has pervaded government and mainstream media since October. It is their job to lobby to that end, in fact. They are Zionist lobbyists. And she's one of the most virulent of people when it comes to trying to get people doxxed, sacked and so on. Let's get this clear. She ran an account called This Is Anti-Semitism, which involved sharing to an account the social media posts and accounts of people who shared what she described as anti-Semitic commentary, doing exactly the same thing, precisely the same thing that she says was done to her. You can slice bread with this level of hypocrisy. This one shitty page in The Australian is doing so much heavy lifting for bullshit artists. Have a look at this. Doctor targeted because I'm a Jew. Why do you say who the doctor is? It's the guy who runs the Australian Jewish Association, the far-right crank David Adler. He's trying to get in on some of this good I've been targeted action. Poor innocent defenceless David, possibly the first guy to have come out with the whole gas the Jews thing since debunked. Poor David, my heart goes out to you. But let's set those fuckheads aside for a second and get back to the Bernard Keane article. He said, those working to damage people professionally were clearly only a minority of the group. Many, perhaps most of the members now out of may not have supported or perhaps not even been aware of the plans to destroy the careers of women deemed anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist. Many in the group were added by others, yet found their names revealed online anyway, as if they were collaborating with those bent on damaging careers. Those people are plainly victims of doxing. And I don't only wholeheartedly agree with this, but I would suggest that we all knew what has happened since February the 8th would happen to some degree, surely, because our political opponents are really great lobbyists and are very connected, and it was reckless to publish a list of them. For one, a list of Jews, not a great look for reasons that I expect an anti-fascist, or really just a well-read audience, to not have to have explained to them. Another problem is that because the data doesn't appear to have been handled by people who knew what they were doing with it, it appears to have put randoms in harm's way. Many of the WhatsApp chat names were nicknames, for example, a set of initials. One of the people in control of the data appears to have made an assumption in extrapolating a set of initials, connecting them to a person who was never actually in the chat, a completely random, non-Zionist, non-Jewish person, just in the list for no reason. Another problem, you can be added to a WhatsApp chat and go on to never engage in it at all. As such, there were avowedly anti-Zionist Jewish people in that chat who, despite either not posting at all, some don't even understand WhatsApp. This might be a difficult concept for the terminally online to grasp, but sometimes people are boomers or not very engaged and they don't get their apps or use them much. Despite either not posting at all or even arguing in that chat, these people are now in the list. People defending the release of this list have coolly argued, they can just identify themselves as anti-Zionist online and then they won't have an issue. They can issue a statement. But if you can't ensure that any would-be harassers of random people on that list check your timeline first for a little anti-Zionist statement, then this is no contingency. This is just an excuse. Indeed, one publicly anti-Zionist Jewish person on this list has apparently had their employer called nonetheless. So we have bad data with a series of people who shouldn't be in it for one reason or another, but who nevertheless have experienced some sort of fallout because of it. It was published non-selectively without being framed and contextualised. And what's happened as a result of that? In just 4 days, what was initially a satisfying setback for local Zionists in the arts and academia spaces has been transformed into an international news item, with the PM now seriously considering doxing laws that will affect us all. He has crossbench support. This would affect serious data research, including anti-fascist research. It would affect journalists. It's a terrifying prospect, Listen, after many years in anti-fascism, I am very loath to blame yet another latest authoritarian legal proposal on activists, which is usually the favourite pursuit of all Australian normies, because as we know, we're headed that way anyway. But we all know damn well this didn't happen just because the chat leaked, but rather strictly because of the incredible own goal given to the Executive Council of Australian Jewry and our political opponents by this spreadsheet. We're in a localised political battle against prodigiously talented and connected lobbyists, and they got the ideal impetus to broker for our criminalisation. And criminalising protest has been the endgame of these Zionists in Australia ever since they pretended that a racist chant at an October rally was actually a call to genocide. Our political opponents don't give a shit about Theo, who put a Palestinian flag outside of his home and for it had a bomb placed on top of his car warning him to take the flag down, otherwise they'd blow him up. The reason that happened is because he was doxxed inside a Jews of Sydney group on Facebook. No one appears to give a shit about that. That is not only not talked about in the mainstream media, our Prime Minister certainly didn't talk, as far as I'm aware, about introducing new laws to protect people like Theo. They also don't appear to give a shit about the bulk doxing of pro-Palestinian, pro-peace doctors and medical professionals being doxed by an Instagram account called NotMyDoctor48. If you want to find out about these issues, because you're not going to find out about them from Chip Legrand, then please go and follow excellent independent media like Michael West Media, which is doing up-to-date coverage on both of those stories I've just mentioned. At the end of the day, it seems to me that doxing as a definition is a completely shifting sands idea, and it's up for grabs by whoever has the most power to grasp it. I think in this case we should all be continually aware that we are up against prodigiously talented and well-connected lobbyist opponents who will make very excellent use of any free kicks that we hand to them.
I think overwhelmingly there is support for our community at a leadership level. We've engaged with the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Home Affairs Minister almost daily since October 7, and I feel that the support is strong. We were concerned that as time passed from October 7, that support would start to fracture within the party and dissipate. That hasn't really occurred.
And if it's not enough to talk about the impressive lobbying capacities of local Zionists like Alex Ripchin here, then how about this? Consider that in addition to those lobbying powers, the Australian media and political landscape is already incredibly conservative, and they are just looking for an excuse to get the boot in against activists. Oh, I'm sure that Alex is a very persuasive guy, but you've got to consider that our government are probably all ears when it comes to clamping down on radicals. Give them free kicks in the form of ill-considered releases of personal data of any kind and see what happens, right? It's been my experience that whenever disagreements break out between activists about failures or setbacks, there's often a call to focus on the more urgent goals at hand, and never are those calls more ostensibly justified than right now as millions of terrified and displaced Palestinians crowd in RAFAH at the mercy of the bloody IDF, and they are more important. We all know that. They're vitally, singularly important, more so than anything else in the world right now. But we must remember what we're here for. As in here, in Australia, as activists, we are here to bring people into pro-Palestinian activism who will then spread the word, hopefully foment change, and hopefully filter into local direct actions that put more pressure on Australian suppliers and sponsors and political allies of Israel. More pressure than just rocking up to a rally. We're here to leverage activist power to pressure our government to apply pressure to Israel. And yes, we're also here in solidarity, sure, but we can't do any of that if we are criminalised and reduced in numbers, and that is exactly what these pricks, our political opponents, are trying to do to us. They're trying to criminalise us and reduce our numbers. Let's not help them to do so. It's too important. There's rallies on this weekend in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, Gold Coast, Adelaide, Canberra. That was a cursory check on my part. I have no doubt whatsoever there'd be lots more. Let me know in the comments. Let each other know. Please get along. That's only the start. It's not enough. It's not enough to go to a rally. It'll never be enough. But this is what you need to be doing right now. It's a start.
Salam, human beings. We are not a caravan of despair. Peace.